Hello, estudiantes. Today we're going to talk about reflexive verbs, or los verbos reflexivos. Please take out your reflexive note guide. You can either find it in the My Big Campus bundle called Vamos a Repasar, or you can also find the note guide in your packet that I gave you this week in class. So, let's talk a little bit about what are the differences between reflexive verbs and just regular verbs. In Spanish, if I use a reflexive verb, the reflexive verb does and receives the action. So the first sentence says the following: La estudiante se prepara para el examen de español. The student prepares oneself for the Spanish test. The second sentence, La profesora prepara a los estudiantes para el examen de español. The professor prepares the students for the Spanish test. So, in Spanish, the subject does and receives the action. That is a reflexive verb. So the first sentence is reflexive. However, the second sentence is not reflexive because it's not an action that's going on to the subject. It's going on to the object. So, here are some common reflexive verbs. The first one we're going to talk about is the verb ducharse, which means to shower oneself. In Spanish, if I want to make the reflexive verb, if I want to conjugate the reflexive verb, we take that se and it morphs into me, te, nos, or se, and that is all determined by the subject. So, if I want to say I shower myself, I would say me ducho. If I wanted to say you shower yourself, I would say te duchas. If I wanted to say he or she showers oneself, I would say nos duchamos. If I wanted to say we shower ourselves, I would say nos duchamos. And if I wanted to say they shower ourselves, I would say se duchan. So that reflexive pronoun, if it's in the yo form, is me. In the tu form, te. In the he, she form, se. In the we form, nos. In the they form, se. Also, the same endings for present tense verbs are also the same for reflexive verbs. In Spanish, remember, I take off the AR, and if I want to say I shower, I say o, as, for the tu form, as, the he, she form, a, nosotros form, amos, and the ustedes form, an. The same present tense endings for present tense verbs are also the same for reflexive verbs. What I want you to do right now is I want you to stop the video and I want you to refer to your note guide and I want you to practice with a different reflexive verb that is also an AR verb like ducharse. This verb is acostarse, which means to go to sleep. This verb stem changes from O to UE, and if you remember from Spanish 1 and 2, all stem-changing verbs stem change in all forms except the nosotros form. So I want you to practice with this verb acostarse. You're going to say, I go to sleep, you go to sleep, he or she goes to sleep, we go to sleep, they go to sleep. So you should have already done that. Now we're going to focus on an IR verb. The IR verb that we're going to focus on is to go to sleep. So this one is dormirse, and its stem changes from O to UE in all forms except the nosotros form. So if I want to say I go to sleep, I would say me duermo. You go to sleep, te duermes. He or she goes to sleep, se duerme. We go to sleep, nos dormimos. Notice there's no stem change in the nosotros form. And in the ustedes form, se duermen. Remember, we use the same endings for reflexive verbs as we would use for present tense regular verbs. So in this situation, we would use o, es, imos, and en for this IR verb, dormirse. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to stop the video and I want you to practice with the reflexive verb on your note guide, vestirse. This one means to get dressed and its stem changes from E to I in all forms except the nosotros form. So stop the video and practice conjugating this popular reflexive verb before we move on. Here are some popular reflexive verbs. Later in class, we will do some activities with these verbs to help you memorize the vocabulary words. Despertarse, as you should remember from Spanish 2, means to wake up. It stem changes from E to IE. Acostarse, to go to bed. It stem changes from O to UE. Maquillarse, to put on makeup. Bañarse, to comb one's hair or do one's hair. Afeitarse, to shave oneself. Bañarse, to bathe oneself. Ducharse, to shower oneself. Cepillarse los dientes, to brush one's teeth. Secarse el pelo, to dry one's hair. Vestirse, to get dressed. So, let's practice conjugating some of these popular reflexive verbs. Sentarse. Oh, let's talk about some others before we do that. I'm sorry. Sentarse is to sit down. Sentirse triste, to feel sad. Divertirse, to have fun. Quitarse la ropa, to take off your clothes. Levantarse, to get up. Callarse, to be quiet. And acordarse, to remember. There's also more verbs in the e-text of your Anda book on page 22 and 23. So, let's practice conjugating these popular reflexive verbs. Look at your note guide and follow along and try to do it before I give you the answer. So, let's focus on acostarse. ¿Cómo se dice I go to bed en español? Me acuesto. I go to bed. ¿Cómo se dice you comb your hair? Te bañas. ¿Cómo se dice he or she shaves? Se afieta. ¿Cómo se dice I bathe? Me baño. ¿Cómo se dice you dry your hair? Te secas el pelo. ¿Cómo se dice I dress myself? Me visto. So hopefully you got some of those sentences correct. So, reflexivo or no. Vamos a escribir una oración para cada foto. So, let's write a sentence for each word, or for each photo. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to look at your note guide and I want you to write some sentences that represent this picture using reflexive verbs. If you need to go back and you don't know the meaning of these words or what they have and how they're spelled, you can go back on the you can go back and look at the video and you can see what these words mean. So, for the first picture, you would say something like I get up, or he or she gets up, or you get up. Okay, so stop the video and I want you to write I want you to write sentences that represent this picture using reflexive verbs. So, let's do another activity, and this is on your note guide. And what you're going to do is you're going to tell me, you're going to circle the sentences that are reflexive. So that means that the subject, or the first part of the sentence, is doing and receiving the action. So I want you to circle the sentences that have reflexive verbs in them. We'll talk about them when we get to class next time we meet. So let's conjugate some reflexive verbs. Cristobal siempre ponerse las botas antes de salir de casa cuando llueve. So now we need to take the verb ponerse and we need to conjugate it to agree with Cristobal. Se pone. Cristobal siempre se pone las botas antes de salir de casa cuando llueve. So, let's do another one. Dedicarse mucho a mis estudios. Me dedico. I'm dedicated. I'm very dedicated. I dedicated myself a lot to my studies. Me dedico. Levantarse temprano para asistir a nuestras clases. You could say nos levantamos. We get up early in order to attend our classes. So what I want you to do is I want you to practice using some different reflexive verbs on your note guide. So I want you to do 1, 2, and 3. The verbs are different, but it's the same concept. So for example, number 1, she always showers at night. You're going to take the verb ducharse and conjugate it in the present tense he, she form. Use the video if you need to look at ducharse, because remember we conjugated at the beginning of the video. I hope that you understand how to use reflexive verbs. When you come to class next time, we will have a flipped mini quiz over this important grammar concept. Adios!